Bienvenidos, bienvenidas, bienvenides. Welcome back to our returning listeners, and hello to all our new audience members. If you've been listening for a while, you might know that we usually release student work between semesters. These episodes usually consist of different students sharing their final projects and cover a wide array of topics. This time, however, we're bringing you something a little different. Each Wednesday in January, we will be releasing a podcast episode fully created by the students in my Fall 2024 Survey of Caribbean Literature course. These students worked together in groups throughout the semester to create podcast episodes that reflected the literature, themes, and concepts we covered in the class. They researched the ideas that interested them the most and analyzed different forms of literature from the Caribbean, including novels, short stories, poetry, songs, and film. They learned how to record, edit, and produce a podcast project that they could be proud of putting out into the world. Please let them know how you feel about their work by listening and sharing this episode. Give them a shout out on social media by tagging Latinx Visions on Instagram and Blue Sky. I know I'm proud of the work they did, and they should be too. So without any further delay, here's this week's episode.
Welcome to Baddies Who Read. My name is Juliemarie Hernandez, and I will be your host for today's podcast. On today's episode, we have our super baddies who have dived into the Caribbean. I'm not talking about out here like the Caribbean as in the beaches, right? Because every time we talk about the Caribbean, we just think about these beautiful, gorgeous, blue, clear beaches. Not like these nasty beaches we got in New York. Like, come on, Orchard Beach, y'all. Coney Island Beach. Like, that's not a beach, y'all. We talking about today, in this podcast, we will be talking about authors of the Caribbean. Now, we do not shine and we do not do a very good job of giving kudos to those who are in the Caribbean, who are doing the work, right? Who are authors who have written, right? And so today, my beautiful sisters have dived in, and they're going to be talking about different types of topics, right? So some of the topics we're going to be discussing today, right, is first off, we got to give historical memory. Like, we got to be on the same page about the history in the Caribbean. So Ariana, our sister, is going to be leading us in that. Then we're going to dive into the family dynamics. Now, I'm going to need y'all later on to go get y'all Kleenex. Don't worry, I'll remind you. And Shania and Bianca are going to be leading us in that segment. And then we're going to really quickly go into colonialism and multi-generational trauma in womanhood. And I do have to give you a trigger warning because Leticia will really beautifully and delicately drive us through there. And then we're going to wrap it up really quickly with the portrayals of Black women in media and its effect on colorism. And Grace is gracefully going to be guiding us through that and navigating us, right? But not only will we be discussing these topics, right, that these beautiful ladies will be introducing us to, but we're also going to be talking about some of the stories and how we personally have related to these topics, right? So as we get ready and as we prepare to dive into these segments, will you help me introduce Ariana as she gives us a little bit of a refresher on our historical memory of the Caribbean? Get something straight. So Ariana, what can you tell us about the Caribbean? Now, girls, remember, grab your Kleenexes and grab a friend and let's listen in.
Hey, this is Ariana Purisic, and welcome to today's discussion on Afro-Caribbean families and the transmission of generational trauma. I will be looking at how Afro-Caribbean families have changed throughout time, their history as well as specific dynamics, gender dynamics also, what generational trauma is, and how it impacts families. Now let's get into it. Among the Spanish, British, and French Caribbean islands during slavery and emancipation, as well as the migratory period from the 1950s to now, what makes Afro-Caribbean families different from other families? What are its distinguishing traits? Well, they are mostly characterized by being non-nuclear family structures, but that was according to many anthropologists in the mid-20th century. Other words used to describe the families were disorganized, fractured, and unstable. Features of the criteria for these descriptions included where parent-child bonds are above husband and wife bonds. There are illegitimate children and extended families. This came to be better understood and coined in 1966 by anthropologist Raymond T. Smith as matrifocality. Matrifocality is a property of the internal relations of male, as well as female-headed households, wherein women in their role as mothers come to be the focus of relationships rather than head of household as such. Women are the primary economic providers and decision-makers for household needs. Conversely, the men play a role, but is sometimes marginalized. There are many different explanations provided as to why there is matrifocality in Afro-Caribbean families. Some argue the structure reflects African cultural patterns that emphasize women's roles in everyday life. There are economic factors such as high rates of male migration for work, male unemployment, and poverty as a constant force in shaping family structures. Others decide to go all the way back to the Atlantic slave trade. According to Olive Sr., a writer but also sociologist, enslaved women were frequently used as sexual concubines by white slave owners, leading to the birth of mixed-race children. These children were sometimes freed or given preferential treatment, reinforcing the mother's role as the primary caregiver. Children also inherit the legal status of their mothers, making the mother-child bond the most consistent and recognized relationship. Fathers were rarely acknowledged unless only slave owners were. Thus, men's inability to fill roles disrupted the establishment of patriarchal family structures, making women the central figures in family life. Despite claims that matrifocality is non-normative and therefore wrong, Lane Renaud, an English academic expert in Caribbean fiction, stressed the resilience of Afro-Caribbean families, especially their reliance on matrifocality, evolved a survival strategy. She supplements this view with Erna Brodwer's concept of the fractal family tree, where nonlinear, expansive networks of care beyond biological ties help sustain communities. Erna Brodwer's research shows how storytelling helps reinterpret traumatic histories, transforming pain into empowerment. Sharing family narratives builds resilience by connecting younger generations to their heritage while providing context for understanding and healing past wounds. Another feature of Afro-Caribbean families is transnationalism, explained most eloquently in Mary Chamberlain's chapter Identity and Kinship, Caribbean Transnational Narratives. The Caribbean was built on waves of migration, both forced and voluntary. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, over 15 million Africans were brought to the Caribbean as slaves, while other groups, including indentured laborers from India and China, followed in the 19th century. After emancipation, migration within the Caribbean was common, with many moving from older colonies to newer ones, like Trinidad and Guyana. Later in the 20th century, Caribbean families migrated to the U.S., the UK, and other parts of the world, seeking better economic opportunities. Interestingly enough, this was not looked down upon in families, since working outside the country expanded and did not drastically shake up family links. Along with matrifocality, the practice of co-parenting, fostering, and child shifting became essential to survival and resilience, particularly in the context of migration. Despite the physical distances, Caribbean families have maintained strong kinship networks, relying on regular communication through letters, remittances, and visits to uphold family connections. However, unfortunately, in contemporary times, there is a phenomenon in the Caribbean transnational families known as barrel children. Barrel children are those whose parents leave the Caribbean to seek out better economic opportunities, sending barrels back filled with clothing, food, and other material items. While these barrels symbolize care and provision, they often mask the emotional toll of parental absence. Emotional impacts include abandonment, depression, and low self-esteem. Multimedia Journalist Fellow for the Center for Health Journalism, Melissa Dole, goes on further about how when families reunite, often years later, they face challenges in rebuilding trust and repairing bonds damaged by separation. She proposes the solution for other journalists approaching families is being better equipped with knowledge to raise awareness about proper planning before migration by setting up trusting caregivers and engaging with social workers and activists help address community interests. As we've seen thus far, generational trauma is a problem. But what is generational trauma? Generational trauma is the transmission of trauma or its legacy in the form of a psychological consequence of an injury or attack, poverty, and so forth, from the generation experiencing trauma to subsequent generations, as defined by the American Psychological Association. The impact generational trauma can have on individuals and families is emotional distress, attachment issues, and chronic stress. Emotional distress is when individuals may struggle with feelings of anxiety, anger, or depression without understanding the origins, as the unresolved trauma from previous generations shapes their emotional responses. Attachment issues is when trauma can impair the ability to form healthy relationships, leading to patterns of avoidance or dependency. And lastly, chronic stress is when inherited trauma often results in heightened stress responses, which can make it hard to cope with daily challenges, thus perpetuating the cycle of trauma across generations. In Afro-Caribbean families, the process of healing often involves a combination of therapy, community support, and cultural reclamation, helping families reconnect with their heritage and rebuild stronger, healthier bonds. Afro-Caribbean families are a testament to survival, adaptation, and transformation. And while the shadows of historical trauma persist, so do the threads of resilience woven through generations. Understanding these dynamics not only honors the past, but also empowers future generations to heal and thrive. Let's continue to explore these histories and share these stories, as they are not just about the past, but about shaping a better, more connected future. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this topic as much as I did. Bye.
Now, in this segment, we will have our homegirls, Shania and Bianca, dive right into the family dynamics. Now, giving ouch vibes already. I know, family is a really hard topic. I get you, I'm with you, girl. Well, baddies, buckle up because Shania is gonna not only touch upon these family dynamics, but remember, we are focusing on the Caribbean, so definitely gonna be hearing some crazy stories, right? Like, we already probably thinking about it. Like, I know. We're gonna take a moment. Let's pause real quick. All right, yes, you remembered it already. I know. I bet y'all already imagining the crazy story in your head, right? That's why we took a second. It's okay. Just finish that thought, right? Now, while our girl Shania opened us up on the topic of family dynamics with our new favorite Haitian author, Edwidge Denicart, I hope I said that right? Bianca is gonna put us on to a Jamaican author and poet by the name of Lorana Goddison, and I really hope I said that right. It's probably Goodison, sorry. I'm really bad at pronunciation. Through these two authors, we are gonna see how now this tag team of Shania and Bianca, right? Because they a tag team. They're going to tag it up. Will take us through the themes associated with mother-daughter dynamics. So, my baddies, get your Kleenex or your boxing gloves out and get ready. Because, I already know this is a sore spot for many of us. Let's get it on. Take it away, ladies.
Hey, it's Bianca.
And Shania.
Today we wanted to discuss the family dynamics in a Caribbean household, specifically the dynamics between a mother and her daughter. We might develop into generational traumas a little, as both me and Shania's pieces of literature can get a little dark or even depressing.
I'm going to be discussing a book called Breath, Eyes, Memory by the Haitian author Edwidge Denicart.
And what is that about?
It's about this girl named Sophie. Ever since she was born, she lived under the care of her Aunt Addie, separated from her mother. Well, one day when Sophie was 12, her mother, Martine, sent a telegram to Addie saying she wanted Sophie to come and live with her.
That doesn't sound too bad. At least we know she cares about her daughter.
But things aren't all light and dandy. Sophie has to leave the only family she's ever known. She considers Addie her mother at this point, the only real mother she's ever known, so she's not happy. Alexia Block once did a study on other mothers and grandmothers, and in her paper she said that when a child has been separated from their mother for so long and is left with an aunt or grandmother, they sometimes refer to them as mama and refer to their actual mother as their other mother.
I wouldn't be happy either if I was forced to leave the woman that raised me to go live with a woman that I only seen in pictures.
Right. But she goes willingly, and out of the love for her Aunt Addie, she is respectful towards her mother and gives her the chance. Martine is not what she imagined, which is a little disappointing for her, and rightfully so. We can see there's something a little off with her mother when they reach their new home. Her mother has a doll, a life-size doll. Not one she purchased for Sophie, even though she did give it to her, but one she had originally for herself. and used it to help with her problems.
Like as a surrogate daughter?
Exactly like that. Is that not a little weird?
I don't want to be the type to judge. We listen and we don't judge.
But I am judging, and so should have Sophie. Because as things progressed, we find out there's a lot more that's wrong with Martine. Sophie grows up, and her relationship with her mother gets more and more strained. Martine wants her to be a doctor, despite what Sophie wants. Martine wants her to stay away from boys until she's 18.
But that's a normal thing when it comes to mother and daughter relationships.
True, but it gets a little dark after Sophie actually meets and falls in love with a man. Sophie starts sneaking out to meet up with a man named Joseph when her mother is busy working night shifts. One day, when Sophie goes out to meet with Joseph, she returns late in the night to find her mother with a belt.
Oh, I remember my sneaky link-ups. I just know her mother was ready to turn her every way but loose.
Yep. So when Sophie walks to the door, all hell breaks loose. At first, Martine is loud and angry, but then she gets a little quiet and pulls Sophie to her room and proceeds to test her.
What do you mean by test her?
As in, she has Sophie lay down on her bed and proceeds to use her fingers to test if Sophie is still a virgin.
Oh my goodness, what?
Yep, what she revealed earlier in the book is something her mother, Sophie's grandmother, used to do to her when she was a child. Martine did this for weeks, traumatizing Sophie until the point where she takes her own virginity, causing her mother to kick her out once she does not meet her standards. She runs away with Joseph, the two of them get married, and she lives a difficult life trying to deal with the lasting effects those purity tests left on her. She struggles with dealing with that trauma and her complicated relationship with her mother. Sophie's story about her relationship with her mother highlights the depths of mother-daughter relationships that come with a Caribbean identity. I think Sophie's relationship with her mother represents a few things.
What do you think the relationship represents?
I think the relationship shows that Caribbean mothers have very little boundaries with their daughters. They are either constantly overstepping or oversharing. In the case of Sophie and Martine did both of these things. She overstepped Sophie's boundaries, violating her every day for weeks in her failed attempts to ensure that she was pure. In her mind, she was doing the right thing because this was something her mother did to her after her mother as well. So for Martine, overstepping was her motherly duty.
Motherly duty, my behind.
As for oversharing, I've learned through personal experience that Caribbean mothers love to overshare. They tell their daughters, no matter the age, of their problems, putting a lot of pressure onto them and making them feel almost guilty. When Martine has a nightmare shortly after Sophie was brought home, she explains that it is because of the circumstances surrounding Sophie's birth. A child at Sophie's age should not know the source of her mother's nightmares is because of a rape that resulted in her birth. That adds to the trauma for Sophie and makes her feel a lot like a burden. This is common behavior for Caribbean mothers.
Yeah, and some mothers don't even tell their daughters that they have an overprotective guard on them. They just have it on them for no reason at all.
Another thing about the relationship is that I think it shows a lot of Caribbean mothers see their daughters as mirrors of sorts. They use them to act out their unfinished goals and their unmet desires that they never got to accomplish when they were younger. In the beginning, when Martine was introducing Sophie to her boyfriend Mark, he asked what Sophie wanted to be when she grew up. Her mother cut in and said that Sophie was too young to know, but then immediately turned to Sophie and said, "You are going to be a doctor." When Denticat first wrote about Martine's environment, her apartment, she wrote that there was a medical book on the table. So it's obvious that Martine is the one that wants to be a doctor. But because she went through so much in her life, she thinks it's a little too late for her. So she is using her daughter to reach that goal. She does this a few times in the book, like when they both discuss Attie not going to school. Martine said this is up to Sophie to bring them respect. She says, "If you make something of yourself in life, we will all succeed. You can raise our heads."
I heard that you're going to be a doctor line before.
Right. So Martine is using Sophie to bring honor to the entire family in a way. But when she thinks that Sophie is having sex, she sees a little too much of herself in her and kicks her out. Her flaws were being reflected in Sophie's face and she couldn't live with it.
So what happened with Martine and Sophia after she kicked Sophia out?
Eventually, her and Sophie meet a few years later when Sophie is back in Haiti, running away from her problems that stem from her mother's purity test. They reconcile and begin to have a relationship again before Martine ultimately kills herself. Sophie, who hasn't been back in Haiti since she was 12, bonds over with Attie and her mother. This reminds me of a quote I read in a paper written by Grace Ayodele that discussed mothers and the motherland. The quote goes, We are bonded in the loss of separation from mothers and motherlands. So, Caribbean mothers can be extremely caring for their children, but their connection with their daughters almost always have a hint of hostility or friction. Their relationship is too complex to be explained in simple terms.
Not only Sophie, but Martine has been through a lot.
I know. I also know that you have some pieces you would like to share.
I do. Have you heard about the iconic Jamaican poet, Lornan Goodston?
No, tell me a little about her.
Lornan Goodston was born in Kingstown, Jamaica, and in 2018, she received a Wyndham Campbell Literature Prize. And in 2019, she was awarded the Queen's Gold Medal for Poetry.
I just love to see Black people getting acknowledged for their hard work and talent.
Right? Many of her poems highlight the relationships between mothers and daughters, siblings, and extended family members. She often portrays the complexity of these relationships, capturing the joy, tension, and emotional depths within families.
There is nothing quite like a mother-daughter relationship.
One of her poems that I really resonate with a lot is For My Mother, May I Inhabit Half of Her Strength. Goodston captures the complexity of a mother's role in the family, revealing how the personal aspects and the historical aspects intersect.
Okay, tell me a little about this.
Let's get right into a line from her poem that stuck with me. Goodston wrote, "She could work miracles. She would make a garment from a square of cloth in a span of definite time, or feed 20 people on a stew made from falling from the head cabbage leaves, and a carrot, and a chocho, and a palm full of meat."
Now that sounds like a good mother right there.
A good mother indeed. And it reminded me of my own mother, even my grandmother. Well, stories my mom told me about my grandmother, which made her the woman she is today.
Do you mind sharing one of those stories?
I'm glad you asked. Mama is what we call my grandmother. Mama was a chef and a kind-hearted soul. I wish I was able to taste her cooking. But on the other hand, my mom could cook. So you imagine my grandmother.
I know that food was hitting.
Yup, and it always does. My grandmother would not just make food for her and the people in her house. If you was walking down the lane, she had extras for everyone. She would buy extra pound of meat and rice.
That's actually so sweet.
And that's just one story. And now I see why when my mom cooks, we always have leftovers. Not because the food is not good, but because she's taken what she learned from her mother, my grandmother, where you don't just cook for you and your household, but cook it for a community.
That is such a caring thing to do. I hope you inherit that from your mom.
I do too. That's not all though. There's another part that really hits home in Goodston's poem. It's when she said, "There's a place somewhere my mother never took the younger ones. A country where my father with the always smile, my father whom all women loved, who had the perpetual quality of wonder given only to a child, hurt his bride."
How does this hit home?
Now, this is a question I'm not glad you asked. But since you did, I might as well tell you. My dad's Jamaican. I think I said enough. That little rumor when you hear around about Jamaican men being cheaters, yeah, believe him. I would not say my dad was a loyal man, but a loving man. And a loving man to multiple individuals indeed. And my mom is still married to him 30 years later.
Ooh.
I don't know how she does it, but I do understand when Goodston titled her poem, "May I Inhabit Half of Her Strength." Emphasis on the half. A next poem made by Goodston that I feel deserves a lot of recognition is Mother, the Great Stones Got to Move.
What's that one about?
The poem is about overcoming oppression and moving past obstacles that prevent progress. The speaker calls on their mother to help remove great stones that blocks the future of children, including stones of poverty, violence, and social injustice. The repetitive refrain of "Mother, these great stones got to move" emphasizes the urge need for change.
So it's about generational trauma.
Yes, indeed. Goodston wrote, "For the years going out came in fat at first, but towards the harvest it grew lean, and many mouth corners gathered white, and others kind of poison, powdered white, was brought in to replace what was green, and death sells it with one hand, and with the other death palms a gun. Then death gets that picture in the paper asking, where does all this death come from?"
This is actually really intense and a thoughtful question.
Yes, it is, and it's important to remember that British had control over Jamaica from 1655 until 1962.
Oh, I almost forgot about the British controlling Jamaica.
Yeah, and Jamaica was pulled into a drug trade. The drug trade in the 18th century Britain, particularly the involvement in the transatlantic slave trade and the production of illegal substances that had a huge impact on Jamaica. Driven by the drug trade, that comes to a people already broken by the legacy of slavery and colonism. When she tied together in her fifth stanza, saying narcosis became the soup and meat for its users.
Oh, wow. So Britain really corrupted Jamaica.
They sure did. And Gerstein ended it off with, Mother, these great stones got to move. You know what that means?
No?
When she says great stones, she's referring to the great burdens Jamaica has faced due to colonism times and how it continues to affect the people of Jamaica. And when she says mother, it's because a mother is known as a nurturing figure, so she calls on a mother to take up the role in helping the burdens go away.
Wow. That is enlightening and a great takeaway on that note. That actually wraps up today's episode. We'd cover the complexities of mother-daughter relationships and touched on generational trauma. Thank you for being here for a discussion on Baddies Who Read.
Next up, we have Leticia. Okay, girl, get it. Okay, what you gonna be talking to us about, girl? Okay. She gonna be talking about, I know what you gonna talk about. Girl, I already know. You gonna talk about what we don't want to talk about, what we know we don't want to talk about. I got you. Leticia is going to be talking to us about colonialism and multi-generational trauma in womanhood. Wow. That's a mouthful and that's a lot, right? And I told y'all to get y'all Kleenex out in the last segment. So y'all better have gotten it out, because if y'all thought Leticia was going to come in nice and soft, she coming out swinging, right? And she's going to go deep fast, like pause. Hey, yo, right? But some trigger warnings I have to give you for this next up topic, right? If y'all didn't get triggered by the mother-daughter situation in the last segment, let me let you know right now that Leticia will not hold back in this one, right? And so, in this next topic, my listening baddies, let's let Leticia take it away. Come on, girl. Teach us something.
This podcast explores the stories and legacies that shape our humanity. Exploring multi-generational trauma, mental health, and cultural identity and Afro-Caribbean lives. Today's episode explores an intricate, tangible theme of multi-generational trauma, mental health, and cultural identity. Today, we will examine multi-generational identity and mental health issues through the lens of Afro-Caribbean womanhood and the enduring effects of colonialism. Colonialism left behind more than just borders and systems. The trauma reflects deep and often painful marked family dynamics. Playwright Kawi Armand captures stories that reflect the emotional intricacies of Afro-Caribbean life, usually centering on strained family relationships. An example is Alamina's Kitchen. In London's Hackney Delhi, a hardworking father tries to protect his son, Ashley, from the pull of gang culture. Through this story, Kawi Armand examines the generational divide and the unhealing wounds caused by systemic racism and colonial displacement. One of the play's most poignant aspects is Delhi's relationship with his father, Clifton. In Bonds and Bondage, page 12, Ashley laughs. "You're a punk, Dad. I was giving you a chance to let the whole world know, the whole area know that you're Ashley's father. And so we roll on. But no, you want to stay small and insignificant, weak. You disgust me." This topic is evident throughout the writers of literature of colonial times. As we, the readers, explore the concepts of hungry ghosts, a recurring pattern emerged. Children expressing anger towards parents who fail to shield themselves or their children from prejudice and hatred. Their complex relationship is a repeating pattern of emotional detachment that often is rooted in multi-generational trauma. This pattern underscores how historical trauma continues to affect present-day relationships. Beyond family dynamics, Kawi Armand also addresses cultural identity, particularly delineation of those of mixed heritage. Kuwi Arma works challenge simplistic ideas of identity, urging audience to confront their biases and embrace the complexity of dual heritage. Your identity is valid, and it is okay to feel the tension that comes with it. What does this mean for mental health in Afro-Caribbean communities? Multi-generational trauma is not just a thing of the past. It is ongoing reality. It is more than likely that curability of challenges such as depression, anxiety, and fractured family bonds. The podcast inspires us, starting with a healing and awareness. It is about proclaiming our stories, honoring our heritage, and fostering up dialogue. Our stories matter because sharing our stories can be a decisive step toward healing. How do our family history and cultural identity shape our perspective? What stories we have passed down to us, whether painful or empowering? Sharing these stories, much like what Ahmad does in his plays, can be a step toward internal healing. A poem that I wrote inspired me through a book called Hungry Ghost. A cry for freedom. They say here's the queen, no diamonds, no crowns. As loud as she screams, the sounds of lockdown. The ghost in the shadows brings stories untold, passing the legacy stories of old. Behind island shores, the pain she endures, she thought life was secure. But a life so unsure. I feel their weight, yes, heavy and deep, in every scar they bared and in every scar they keep. Layers and layers, it's more than it seems. Caribbeans are haunted by nightmares and dreams. In each sacrifice, there's strength and regret. Reminded by trauma they'll never forget. They see the blue waves and hot suns in the sands. They don't see the chains and pains on her hands. Behind the closed doors, she fights through the pain. A queen screams in silence, a queen must maintain. It's not just a plot, it's a world full of scars. A history of trauma beneath the moon stars. The ghosts in the shadows, their stories that still bleed. History lingers and cries out to be free. Bound by the echoes, the past can't stay gone. Legacies haunted them and still carry on. Not by their choices, inherited pain. Bound by the curses remains in their veins. My mama maintains, her tears in the rain, holds on to the shame, her past is to blame. Her silence remains, her life was so drained. She took to her grave till death with the chains. What does this mean for mental health in Afro-Caribbean communities? Multi-generational trauma is not just a thing of the past, it's an ongoing reality. It is more than likely that a comorbidity of challenges such as depression, anxiety, and fractured family bonds. The podcast inspires us to starting with healing and awareness. It is about reclaiming our stories, honoring our heritage, and fostering open dialogue. Our stories matter because sharing our stories can be a decisive step towards healing. A call to action. Thank you for joining me on this colonial journey through the legacies of colonialism, resilience, and identity. Let us continue to amplify the voices of Afro-Caribbean women and communities, celebrating their resilience and building understanding and solidarity. We have a voice. We must continue to cry out freedom, to cry out equality. We are all in bondages that seem invisible, but are still there. It's like being in a cage with an open door that you can walk out, but seem like you can't. Well, let's keep speaking out. Let's keep unity. Until next time, stay curious and compassionate.
All right. Now, Leticia out here dropping knowledge. Shoot, she taught me a few things. I ain't even know, girl. You was gonna go, dang, okay. Here's Grace now to lead us in a discussion about how Black women are portrayed in media and how colorism affects that portrayal. Wow. Yo, we really got to talk about this because let me let you know, like, I don't like how my sisters are portrayed out here in these music videos. Like, why we always got to be in bikini bottoms? Like, we don't got clothes. There's not enough clothes out here in the world. Like, shoot. But, Grace, teach us something. Like, lead us through that, girl. Like, what you learn? Put us on.
This is Grace, and welcome to my segment. Today, I'll be discussing colorism and its stronghold on the Black diaspora in general, but especially in the Caribbean. So I have a few pieces of text that I wanted to read to kind of give some historical context, but colorism in general is something that is so deeply ingrained in the Black imaginary all over the diaspora. I had an interesting experience growing up. A lot of Black people say that they weren't surrounded enough by their culture and not surrounded enough by other Black people. But because I, grew up in a major city that's a really big cultural hub my whole life up until high school, I was only surrounded by other Black people, specifically other Caribbean people. And that's given me the unique perspective of my first bully as a dark-skinned Black woman wasn't a white person, but my fellow Black Caribbean counterparts. For example, just I'm half African, half Caribbean. As a kid, I would get my feelings hurt when other kids would call me African because it was something that was spewed as an insult. Being called African wasn't more of like, oh, you're African. It was more of, you're African. And that gave me a negative connotation in my mind. And then as a layer, it was like, you're African and you have dark skin. And so that's led me to just a lot of perspective on colorism. But let's look into kind of the origins and the beginnings of the seeds of colorism. So obviously that was slavery. And I have a quote here from Henriquez in Color Contemporary Society. And this is located on page 208. It says, one of the most important characteristics of society in the British Caribbean is its white bias. This can be regarded as both a conscious and unconscious part of a majority of the population of African descent to approximate as closely as possible to the European. The development of the white bias can be traced back to the slavery period when the white slave owner was the source of all power, authority, and prestige. The hierarchical society of the plantocracy was pyramidal in form, the mass of Black slaves forming the basis of the pyramid and the white planters in its apex. So, just to stop there, I thought it was just very interesting because that is colorism in its definition, is just how close are you to whiteness? How much do you blur the lines? Moving on. An important distinction was made between field slaves, the majority, and domestic slaves. The latter, admitted to the intimacies of life in the planter's household, was able to acquire European cultural traits denied for the most part to field slaves. Imitation of the European, combined with his relatively privileged position, made the domestic slave both envied and admired by his counterpart in the fields. And I thought this was really interesting. So this next part, I have something to say about that. So he continues to say, this historical situation was further complicated by the development of concubinage and manumission. Concubinage on the part of white men and Negro women led to the creation of a mulatto slave offspring. In many instances, these children were favored by their master fathers. Such favor could vary from remission of tasks to, in exceptional cases, being sent to Europe to be educated. In these circumstances, it was inevitable that the mulattoes, or gens de couleur, should occupy an important and distinctive position in the servile population. So, like, obviously over time, we're seeing a pattern of favoritism amongst those who were lighter skinned and mixed rather than fully black and subjected to the fields. I can only imagine over time, not only would this build some type of resentment, but then also sets a standard, which he states in that last sentence. I find it so interesting because as a slave, you're indoctrinated to perceive your master as someone who is a pinnacle of God, someone who is a status of wealth, power, the ideal life. And so on one hand, you have someone who's oppressing you, but then on that same hand, they're also idealized and set as the standard for what success and wealth and power looks like. So then Henriquez goes on to say, it is suggested that there's always been historically an association of things non-European with the primitive, uncouth, and backward in the minds of the colored and Negro peoples of the West Indies. Correspondingly, the developed and the advanced are epitomized in the European. This can be seen in curious ways. Middle-class Jamaicans who visit the U.S. 3 or 4 times a year for shopping and sightseeing, there are cheap return fares to Miami, tend to minimize events in the Negro America's struggle for civil rights and to disassociate themselves from it. Side by side with the historical affection for Britain, there is warmth and affection for the USA with the predicament of the Negro conveniently mine. On the other hand, where they have attained or almost attained parity in numbers with the African population, as in Trinidad and Guyana, the situation is quite different. They form, in fact, their own society apart from the African and colored elements. Status is important in terms of this rather than in terms of the total society. Economic power and political power is shared by both sections. The European element, although having little political but a great deal of economic power, tends to dominate the social hierarchy. So this is describing the parallels between Black people in the Caribbean diaspora, but also the Indian community in the diaspora. And that also created a clash in society because usually in a lot of the Caribbean countries, it is quite homogenous. But after the introduction of the Indian population to places like Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana, it now creates 2 separate ethnic groups that are completely unrelated in culture, but are now competing against each other. Something that I find very interesting is even that population is seen as ideal because although they are not white, their hair is of a looser texture. Their skin can come a little lighter, and their features are not as tied to Blackness, which over time also gave them an updated status in society just for that little separation from Blackness. And then I want to talk about in the middle where they say that Caribbeans separate themselves from the identity of Africans and from African Americans and the rest of the diaspora. And this goes the same for Africans as well. Africans don't associate with Caribbeans or African Americans because people perceive African Americans as they disassociate themselves because they don't want to be tied to American slavery. They don't want to be tied to the archetype of African American. And so what that creates is just a big cultural divide that contributes even more. So something that correlates directly but indirectly that we're going to get into is also the perception of beauty and body types and its ties to color when it comes to beauty standards in the Black community. So there's the archetype that's been constructed from colonialism of the Black female body to be perceived as voluptuous, curvaceous, And I have a text by Gentle's part called Controlling Beauty Ideals. One thing said is, this construction of the Black female body as big and unwomanly, and thus built for functionality and labor, was employed to affirm the use of Black women as slave labor in Europe. It helped to create what I refer to as the ideology of the thick Black woman, the notion that Black women are naturally curvy and voluptuous. On the other hand, many societies, such as those of the Afro-Caribbean, uphold the voluptuous body as a marker of desirable Black feminine. And I thought that this was interesting because, if we look even to the early 2000s and you look at media, it was always white women saying, "Oh, do you think my butt looks fat?" Oh, no, we see an obsession with weight loss. We see an obsession with thinness. But then in the Black community, at the same time, we see the obsession with curvaceousness, and we see how that has become the ideal. So now in the Black community, we're idealizing bigger boobs, bigger butt, a thicker body. And that is what we came to perceive as what's feminine and what's the standard, in complete contrast to white women at that time. But it just stems from plain and simple hypersexualization. And then I think all of this also roots from the mammy archetype, the mammy, Jezebel, and Sapphire archetype. So colorism had a humongous impact on this. So the mammy, on page 203, Gentle's part says, an infamous long-standing image is that of the mammy figure. An infamous long-standing image is that of the mammy figure. This epitome of the faithful, obedient, domestic servant was created to justify Black women's exploitation as house slaves and restrict them to domestic service. The mammy's bigger body significantly contributes to this construction of Black femininity, as her large body, dark skin, and round facial features create an image that poses no sexual threat to white women. Her body was used to mark her as docile and asexual. I find this is interesting. So then this is where we get to media, where if we even look at Black media of the early 2000s and we look at the representation that we got as a Black family, there's such a clear and common theme. There's the dark-skinned father, the light-skinned or brown-skinned mother, the dark-skinned father, and the light-skinned mixed-looking sister. And I always found this very interesting, and I think that it represents where we are in the Black community when it comes to perceived masculinity and perceived femininity.
Period. Mm-hmm. Listen, my beautiful baddies. Honestly, there's just so much, after hearing all these ladies going through this, Ariana, Shania, Bianca, Leticia, Grace, wow. Like, there is just so much that could be said about all these topics. Like, we could be here forever and a half, right? And so these amazing women have accompanied us through all these themes, and they've graciously dived in and done their research to educate us. And ultimately, it's up to us to continue educating ourselves and to stay informed, right? Like, if you're informed, if you're educated, you can make an informed decision, right? You can know how to carry yourself. You can know how to educate others. And especially my baddies out there, like, keep your head up, ladies. Keep your head up. Thank you all for listening to today's podcast. See you next time on Baddies Who Read. This is your host, Juliemarie Hernandez. Tune in next time.